Hello and welcome to the sixth in our session of the Doctoral Consortium series on intelligence. Today I'm delighted to have Philippe Morel with us. Philippe needs no introduction in architectural circles. He's had quite a distinguished career already, teaching on both sides of the English Channel, both at Paris Marquet and at the Berlage, and then also at the Architectural Association. But he's now the director of the Master of Science in Architectural Computation at UCL Bartlett, voted for the last 2 years as the top school of architecture in the world. He is also the co-founder of EZCT, Architecture and Design Research, and of the large-scale 3D printing company X3E. He's the editor of 2 books, Computational Politics and Architecture, from Digital Philosophy to the End of Work, and Disruptive Technologies, the Convergence of New Paradigms in Architecture. I should also add that he is a graduate of the Doctoral Design program at Florida International University. Philippe, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Neil, for this introduction. I'm really happy to be presenting today and to be with all of you guys. So what I will talk about is artificial architecture. As you will see, in fact, I won't address that many things that we can do by making use of artificial intelligence techniques in architecture. I mostly will try to understand what could be the long-term implication of artificial intelligence in the discipline of architecture, and also how this advent of AI will influence architectural education. So as you all know, in the past, most people believed and said, oh, there is such a thing that we cannot do with AI because we need humans for that. And I really love this cartoon drawing here, because at some point it's clear that what is happening at the very moment is the takeover by artificial intelligence for absolutely in every single domain. So I'm a long proponent about the fact that artificial intelligence can do architecture. It can do everything by itself. It can do it extremely well, and it can probably do it much better than maybe 95 of the architects around in the world, which obviously is a bit puzzling because it gives the feeling that I consider 95 of the architects being active in the world at the moment being not that good. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that AI is simply better than those 95% of architects, and maybe even 100% of them. So it's not about the quality of the existing architects. It's much more about the amazing power of artificial intelligence techniques. So I will start by just showing you a couple of things that we have been doing in the past at the Bartlett School of Architecture. First, in the urban design MR program, where I was leading a research cluster, first with Paul Poinet and then with Julian Bessems. And then I will also show you some of the work which is developed at the moment in the architectural computation program, the Master of Science in Architectural Computation programs that I'm leading at the moment. Obviously, if you want to know more, if you want to have details about the name of the students, about the full projects, you can look online. Most of the information is available. You can also take contact with the student. I think you should feel free to do this. It's super important to not to hesitate to create new bridges and to open new discussions with alumni, but also sometimes with ongoing students. So a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2019, 2020, so it's already 5 years ago. The student in the urban design program in our cluster used techniques that were almost traditional, you know, like making use of genetic algorithms uh, for multi-objective optimizations in order to develop urban design projects. Here it was a project that was done in Turkey, in Istanbul, in the city of Istanbul, and it was about the reorganization of the seashore, the seafront in this city. In fact, as we evolved, let's say, as a program, uh, um, uh, yeah, kept advancing, kept moving, we saw the students being more and more interested, not in the issue of form, but in how urban design problems are really existing at the very moment in the world. And when we look at what's happening in urban design, we see that obviously it's not just a problem of urban forms, it's not just problems associated with typologies or morphologies of the urban fabric or even architecture, because obviously when I consider urban design, I really try to deal with every single dimension, every single scale in urban design, not just the scale of the city, but also the scale of the architecture. But then we saw, and this is something we are experiencing more and more at the moment, we know that urban design now is very closely associated with things happening online, especially on social networks. We saw that it's also very much associated with the problem of access. How can we access property, I mean ownership, or how can we make sure that we can find the right apartment or the right dwelling when we want to rent, for example, or to buy apartments. So the students started to develop strategies that were not simply about creating urban forms, about creating urban shapes, but really about thinking in a much more platform-oriented manner. So I think this was in 2020, this group of students really built a complete interface that was available on Android. So it was available for download. And basically the principle was to make sure that people could find online what they were interested in terms of dwelling. And the system was obviously reorganizing itself in real time. So if someone was looking for, let's say, 100-meter apartments, and there were no more apartment available with that area, in real time you would be informed of the availabilities, and you would be reoriented towards another kind of apartment. You would also be able to customize your dwelling, etc., etc. So this is what we were doing in the year 2019 and 2020, 21, and almost 22 as well. At that moment, especially with Julian Bessems, we started to investigate what would happen in La Défense, what would be the future of central business districts at the age of home working. Or remote working in any case. I mean, we can even work in our car if we want, not just at home, but more or less everywhere. And we speculated about the fact that that central business districts all over the world would face difficult times, would struggle in attracting workers in buildings that are not always very beautiful, that are aging, I mean, a bit old, sometimes quite ugly as well. So we asked the student to develop strategies to make sure that we could think of the future of of central business district in terms of reusing, in terms of reuse of existing space, reuse of existing materials as well. And for this kind of project, it was very difficult not to use more advanced artificial intelligence tools, because obviously it's not just about making optimization, like classical optimization of a problem, which is more or less well well set. It was about also reading and extracting information from very big databases. And obviously, this information, when you don't really know what you are looking for, you can use, let's say, standard deterministic techniques. You need to use different kinds of algorithms and artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to pattern recognition, to image segmentation, to the recognition of what could be considered as a valid constructive component and what is to be considered as a construction component which should go to let's say to the trash, you know, because it can be reused. AI techniques are extremely good for this kind of things. So this is what the student developed, which does not mean that they didn't make any kind of connection with more traditional algorithmic techniques. So some students merge the use of artificial intelligence. When I speak about artificial intelligence, okay, let's make it clear. What I have in mind is mostly the use of neural networks and also mostly the use of deep learning techniques, because as you know, artificial intelligence is something very wide, and all kinds of algorithms giving an interesting result can be considered at some point as artificial intelligence. So just to make it precise, I will mostly speak about algorithmic techniques when it's about all the classical algorithmic techniques, including genetic algorithms, for example. And when I will use the term artificial intelligence, what I have in my mind is mostly deep learning techniques. So the student started to make use of different kinds of tools, going from traditional algorithmic techniques, or let's say classical algorithmic techniques, to genetic algorithms, to deep learning, to make sure that they would understand the full complexity of what's happening at the scale of the city, especially when you want to consider many different parameters. So as you can see here, I'm sure some of you recognize the district of La Défense in Paris. This district is the largest central business district in Europe. It was our site, the site we chose. It was a test bed for the urban design research cluster. We led Julian Bessems and myself. And as you can see, the student developed here different kinds of approaches in artificial intelligence, mostly making use of GAN, generative adversarial networks. They created a pipeline of GAN models that were piled, or let's say stacked, one on top of each other, until it gives the results they were looking for. So here, I don't want to go into much detail. I just show you a couple of images so that you can see what it was about. But obviously, as I said before, if you want to have more specific information, more precise information, you can find this online, or you can also feel free to email me, and I will put you in contact with some of the students who were the authors of this amazing research work. What does it mean? It means that for the past 5 years, the Bartlett School of Architecture, and I'm not the only one, has been at the forefront of the use of machine learning techniques in the discipline of architecture. It's not the only school in the world. I think that most top-level universities and architecture schools are making use of computational design techniques at least 15 to 20 years, artificial intelligence techniques for almost 10 years, should I say, and deep learning techniques for 5 years already. So basically, AI has entered the field of architectural research in universities in a very fast manner, in a very quick way. 5 years ago, there was almost no deep learning techniques in architectural schools. And nowadays, we could say that it's simply everywhere. So the pace of development and the pace of adoption of advanced AI techniques in architectural schools is quite amazing. It's really, I would say, it's a phenomenon which in itself is extremely radical and tells a lot about the radical change or radical shifts that we're experiencing nowadays in the discipline of architecture. We all know that most of the radical evolution in architecture starts in architectural schools, and then a few years later they move from universities to let's say the open world of architectural practices. More recently, in the architectural computation program, so I'm lucky enough to be the director of this program. I'm also supervising master thesis in this program, but I'm not the only supervisor. I have many extremely talented colleagues who are supervising master thesis. Some of them, by the way, are also supervising PhD thesis. In the architectural computation program, the approach is slightly different from what I have presented before, because the students focus a bit less on design and they focus much more on solving, let's say, questions that could be considered as scientific research questions. If you look at the titles of this master thesis, you can instantly understand and see what it is about. It's really about using different kinds of algorithmic techniques in order to solve some specific, super specific problems. But when we look into the detail, we saw in the past few years that most of the algorithmic techniques that were used for solving these problems are in fact based on the use of deep learning or based on the use of large language models or diffusion models, etc., etc. Which means that here again we saw a shift at the Bartlett School of Architecture in the AC program. We saw a shift from classical algorithmic techniques towards a massive use of deep learning, diffusion models, and large language models in more or less everything that was done by the student. I want to focus a bit more on this example, which I think is quite nice. This Chinese student, Yu Qiao Wang, made use of deep learning, more specifically a CNN model in computer vision classification, to predict the strength of woods and to make use of pieces of wood that are more or less unorganized, I mean unsorted, and to make use of different kinds of different pieces of wood, wood components, let's say, in the design of structural in structural design. So he made use of a database of the Taiwanese Forestry Institute, and by looking at the correlation between the image, the section, and the cells, the structure, the cellular structure of the pieces of wood, and the mechanical performance of these pieces, then by training a deep learning model on that, it could build a model that was capable of taking as an input an image of an unknown piece of wood, for example, and just by putting this image of a section of a piece of wood, the model was capable of predicting how this piece of wood would behave in the future, and therefore maybe how it could be used or where it could be used in a kind of elementary structure, for example, this simple timber house structure. So I think this was a very really an excellent work, and it seems to me that it's really showing the path towards the future of the architectural discipline. So making use of machine learning, not just for the creation of fancy images, or not just for the creation of interesting architectural concepts, or let's say formal ideas, which, by the way, is okay. I have nothing against that. What I'm just saying is that for sure, the future of architecture and the future of architectural education is going to be much more diverse, and machine learning is going to enter each single part of the design process, including that one here that I'm presenting right now. So based on that, I think there's a couple of questions we could ask regarding the use of artificial intelligence in architecture, especially in architectural education. How is AI reconfiguring architectural education? So it's obviously a question that I'm asking to the society, to all of us as architects, but it's also a question I'm asking to myself. And here, in a sense, I want to, let's say, I want to remind a couple of things that might seem obvious for most people, but that were not that obvious, let's say 25 or 30 years ago. First of all, the history of architecture in the past 400 years was based on the use of such tools, let's say. It was when we wanted to create specific forms, we had to use this kind of French curves. And what's clear is that, I mean, there's many different kinds of curves, but these tools are pretty static, and we could not consider them as really intelligent techniques in the design process. But at the end of the 1990s, if you look at the screen capture of one of these early version of Rhino, what you can see is that architectural design, especially in schools, moved from this kind of tools to this kind of software. What does it mean? It means that, in fact, behind each of these single icon, there's a lot of intelligence. There's a lot of mathematical intelligence or computational intelligence, which is embedded in this in the software itself. So it's obviously a radical shift, but the way students are using this and are using this kind of platform of software tools was not that different. I mean, most students are using Rhino without really asking themselves uh, what is the intrinsic logic behind these icons? What does it mean, mathematically speaking, computationally speaking? And as a student, at the very end of the 90s and at the very beginning of the year 2000, I was a bit skeptical about that because personally I really wanted to know more, and I wanted to know what was behind this kind of tools. So therefore, I started to use Mathematica from Wolfram Research, which is a technical computing platform, technical computing environment, and it's completely generic. You can do more or less everything, but obviously, if you don't know a lot in math or computer science, you are not going to do a lot as well. So, but I think it was probably the best way for me to confront myself to the new reality uh, uh, of of the advent of computational intelligence in the discipline of architecture. And it seems to me that it's very similar to what is happening today. Most people use, for example, ChatGPT without asking themselves, okay, what is behind this kind of system? What is behind this interface? Okay, we all know that we can write prompts, etc., but very few people know what's really, let's say, under the hood. This is why, by the way, we speak about black boxes, because we have the feeling that they are black boxes, even if it's probably a bit of a misinterpretation, because not everything is completely opaque, and there's a lot that we can know when we are using LLMs, for example. By the way, when we are using artificial intelligence or deep learning models, um, in some specific cases, we can even know about the weights that are used by the model, which means that if you know the weight of the model, you more or less know all the parameters of the model, and therefore the black box is not that black anymore. Let's say it becomes a bit more grayish, maybe not completely transparent, maybe not completely white, but it's definitely not a black box anymore. Referring to one of the, let's say, heroes, one of the pioneers of algorithmic architecture, Ivan Sutherland. If you read Ivan Sutherland in detail, what you see is that Ivan Sutherland was already very early on, by the way, he was already stating in 1975 the fact that the kind of tools we are using, especially the kind of algorithmic and computational tools we are using, which in fact, let's say, also refer to what Sutherland called topological and geometric structures, which are built up in the computer memory. In fact, these have this let's say these parameters, the algorithms, but also the topological and geometric structures which are built at the heart of the computer memory, in fact, have a very strong influence on what we are designing, what we are creating as architects. So my endeavor, let's say my project as an architect, the kind of theoretical investigation I was interested in, and which is still the case, by the way, very much had to do with that. I mean, I'm happy in making use of computational techniques, but I really wanted to know what kind of computation we are talking about. So this is why I used Mathematica, which itself was born on top of SMP, a symbolic manipulation program that was developed at Caltech at the very beginning of 1980s, of the 80s of the last centuries. And I started to become a big fan of Mathematica. It became my favorite tool for any kind of operation, any kind of design. I even took part in the organization of the International Mathematica Symposium in 2006. And in fact, what I was interested in mostly, and I'm still interested in that, is that there is a tool which, I mean, Mathematica as a very generic scientific computing platform or technical computing platform, allowed students and scientists to either to deal with quantum physics if they are quantum physicists, or as architects, for example, what I was doing myself with my student, they can also be initiated to the geometry, the Bezier curves geometry, and also initiated to algorithmic techniques. For example, here you can see a couple of examples of what I was teaching to my student, either in France, in Paris, but also, for example, at UCL Bartlett here in 2013 and 2014. It was a small lesson dedicated to the Lagrange polynomial. It was basically a lesson dedicated to polynomial interpolation. So what I really loved, and I think it resonates with what's happening today with ChatGPT and other LLM platforms, you know, is that you can do what it seems that you can do more or less whatever you want with ChatGPT, which I believe is almost true. And it's very similar to what was happening at the very moment at that time with Mathematica and what I was interested in. So I was not interested in using a software that was especially developed for architects. I was interested in making use of the most generic computational technique we could imagine, because my feeling was that computation was changing the world, and I wanted to know what kind of changes and what kind of computation is responsible for these changes. So I was not interested only in architecture, but I was interested in a more global epistemological shift and it's still the case today. So I made use of Mathematica for different kinds of projects. For example, the set design for the famous exhibition Non-Standard Architecture at the Centre Pompidou in Paris in 2003 and 2004. Here I show you very quickly the file. I also made use of it for my master thesis in 2004. Here you see an image of this book, of this tiny booklet. Yeah, I mean, and more recently, in 2021, I also made use of Mathematica in order to create some graphic design figures for an exhibition also at the Centre Pompidou, which was entitled Neurons, and that was organized by Frédéric Miguel. So ultimately, my intuition in 2003 was that one. It was about a shift from 400 years of rationalism towards a new epistemological framework or epistemological context and reality, which is the one of computationalism. I don't know if that word computationalism is the right one. At some point, I don't really believe it's such an important problem. What I mean is that the radicality of this movement from rationalism to computationalism is absolutely crazy, and it's probably with the latest evolutions in artificial intelligence, it's probably what we are truly experiencing, and for some people discovering as well. So conceptually speaking, it's based on this different kinds of concept of universality, which again is really at the basis of my architectural, let's say, investigation. It's really at the basis of my own personal philosophy of architecture, should I say. I'm really interested in architecture in a certain kind of universality, but obviously this universality is extremely different from the universality of, for example, in the international style in modern architecture, or any kind of universality that came from the different modernist paradigms in architecture. I'm interested in this specific universality that you can see here in a very obvious way. The universality of the computer as probably the most generic and the most universal machine that has ever been created, which is at some point as universal as ourselves, as universal as our own brain. And who knows, maybe it's going to be even more universal than that. I mean, we don't know yet what's going to happen here. It seems to me that we should remain extremely cautious, but at the same time, we should not exclude the fact that very soon, or sooner or later, the universality and the power of computers will overcome the power of our brain. So in 2007, very much in line with what I have presented before, I organized in Marseille, at the Maison de l'Architecture et de la Ville, an exhibition whose name was Architecture Beyond Form, the computational turn. Here I presented the work of different architects. Some of them are extremely well known. Some of them are part of my own generation, including Fabio Gramazio and Matthias Köhler, Achim Menges, for example, but also some architects who were much older, um, I mean, from the previous generations. And I did that because it seemed to me it's at that time, probably today, I would have a slightly different historical reading of what happened in the last 50 years. But at that time, I really believed, and I still, it's partly valid, by the way, I really believed that we entered a new, let's say, a situation which is the beginning of what we are experiencing today, thanks to the PhD thesis, the PhD dissertation of Peter Eisenman that was drafted in 1963, and whose title was The Formal Basis of Architecture. So I wanted to build some sort of genealogy, starting with Peter Eisenman in 1963, going through the work of Zahadi, the work of Bernard Tschumi, some later project by Eisenman, like the Guardiola house, but also some project by foreign office architect. I wanted to extract, in a sense, what I consider to be the non-formal in the work of this architect. The non-formal for me was, let's say, the proto-computational. I mean, what things that could be still considered as relevant regarding this computationalism that I'm talking, the computationalism I'm talking about. And later I continued. I kept working on that, organizing a symposium on computational politics, mostly through the lens of the digital philosophy and the end of work in 2011. Then in 2015, a symposium on artificial intelligence, the end of intelligence and architecture as we know them. And also a year later, with some colleagues, another study day, robots and architecture, how the convergence of AI, robotics, and automation is reconfiguring architecture. So basically, all of that is more or less related to what's happening today, I have to say. What I want to insist on is that what we are experiencing today when we make use of ChatGPT, for example, is a situation in which what we are doing is a kind of linguistic work, a kind of linguistic investigation. It has very little to do with architecture as we used to know it in the past 400 years. Architecture in terms of geometry, architecture in terms of visual forms. By the way, it doesn't really matter if it's about distorted geometry or not. It doesn't matter if it's organic geometry or highly Cartesian and square geometries. It seemed to me that we were already going beyond the issue of geometry. We were going beyond the issue of human-based architecture and already entering a world in which computers would start talking to each others, exchanging information in a relatively autonomous manner. And I had the feeling that the future of architecture was, in fact, the future of artificial research, let's say. And I consider myself as a human researcher, but obviously it's clear that I can't do research anymore without being augmented or aided by an artificial researcher, which in fact is a computer connected to ChatGPT or some other systems like that. So this kind of work, and in this article in 2000, I think it was 2005 or 2006, in this article, I said that the ultimate work would be a conceptual work, and I completely agree with the reading that Peter Eisenman made of architecture in 1970 in not a conceptual architecture towards a definition. I really already believed I believed that among all of the other architects that could be considered as postmodern or super modern or let's say more or less deconstructivist or whatever. I don't really mind how they are called. What I believe at that time, and what I still believe, is that probably Peter Eisenman understood in the most rigorous way that the future of architecture would be conceptual, and also the future of anything would also be conceptual, which I think is what's happening today. So in order to explain the situation, Eisenman wrote this essay in 1984 that was published in Perspecta, The End of the Classical, The End of the Beginning, The End of the End. And remember that this was written more or less when deconstructivists started to be deconstructivism started to be invented and started to be developed in the discipline of architecture. And in a student magazine in 1999, I published what was the first translation, a translation that was that has been done by colleagues of mine. I mean, I was a student, so they were not colleagues; they were professors in my school. And this translation of this work of Peter Eisenman seemed to be very important for me, because for the very first time it was showing that we were like really putting an end to the end, which borrowing this quote from Peter Eisenman. So basically, what's happening? Is quite simple. If you look at the discipline of architecture on the long term, you see that most standard concepts and parameters like weather, nature, gravity, materials, construction, function, flux, space, etc., played different roles according to the time period they were considered. Obviously, in the primitive era, protecting ourselves from weather and from nature was the most important parameter in the discipline of architecture. We all know that nowadays it has become standard, and when you look at a building, you don't really pay attention to how the building deals with protection from nature or weather, because it's just part of the most basic things you can wait for in architecture. So in fact, all of this has been transformed into numerical parameters. And these numerical parameters themselves has been transformed into computation. And nowadays, thanks to a kind of more advanced paradigm, they have been reduced. They can be processed by artificial intelligence techniques, mostly deep learning techniques, through the use of connectionist neural network and by adjusting weights. So basically, It doesn't matter if you take as an example the use of a genetic algorithm, the fact that you can encode all of these parameters in a sequence of 0 and 1s, then you can have a complete gene sequence. You can make some calculation on that. You can make crossovers, selection, and then crossover and selection again, etc., etc., in order to optimize a specific set of parameters and in order to get the results you are looking for. So basically, you can put these parameters in genetic algorithms. You can put these parameters in an AI system and transform them in weights in a connectionist model. It's exactly the same problem, conceptually speaking. It's really about having what I call one meta-intelligence, which is encompassing all prior forms of intelligence, which is probably some of the most radical things that has ever happened in the discipline of architecture. Okay, some people could say, yeah, but I mean, we always say this. When we invented reinforced concrete, or when we developed steel structures, or precast structures, etc., etc., it was extremely radical. I totally agree with that. I'm not saying that it was not radical. What I mean is that what's happening today with this kind of meta-intelligence replacing all prior forms of intelligence is, according to me, almost even more radical, because it really concerns everything, not just the structure, not just the material logic, but every single parameter that could be considered in the discipline of architecture. So in terms of culture, this was, let's say, theorized in many science fiction books in the 60s or 70s, including in the Matrix novel by Douglas Mason in 1970, or it was also dealt with by Jean Baudrillard, for example, in France, in Simulacre and Simulation. So the problem here at stake is, okay, we speak about intelligence, but what kind of intelligence are we talking about? What is intelligence? So far, we don't really have a good definition of this. We could say that it's knowledge, and obviously intelligence has to do with knowledge, because if you know absolutely nothing, you can hardly imagine, let's say, bringing some intelligence to a certain kind of situation. We could say that it's knowledge plus something, because knowledge alone is not enough. If you have a chimpanzee that knows absolutely everything, it does not mean that the chimpanzee is going to come up with some intelligent creation or concepts as well. We could say that it's information plus something, because obviously knowledge is transformed into information. I mean, it's a kind of it's a fact. If you look at a computer, by definition, intelligence has been transformed into information, because there's only information in a computer, nothing else. So let's say the debate on what is the definition of intelligence is still a very active debate, and you can look at the history of artificial intelligence also as through the lens of the evolution of the definition of the word intelligence itself. But you can also look at the history of artificial intelligence by starting, of course, with the Foundational Act, this famous workshop at Dartmouth College in 95 and 96, the proposal in 1955, and the actual workshop in 1956. So not 95, 96, but 55 and 56, obviously. So basically, I think it's interesting to start with this workshop and then to unfold the evolution of artificial intelligence through the different kind of definition of the word intelligence. It gives some super interesting information, especially for the discipline of architecture, because obviously when we look at a specific project in architecture, we try to understand and we try to evaluate how this project, how intelligent is that architectural project. But if we don't agree on the definition of the word intelligence, then it's a bit of a waste of time at some point. So for some people, intelligence was associated with the capabilities of using logical inference. If you think in an highly illogical way, you can hardly be considered intelligent. So it's mostly a matter of rules, knowing and being capable of applying rules. For some others, on the contrary, applying rules is something that can be done by a machine, and true intelligence is something that is not done by machines. It has to deal with creativity, with some sort of emergent creative thinking, but at the same time, we don't have a good definition neither of what creativity is doing. For some others, being intelligent is the capability of learning, the capacity of learning. If we can learn, then we are intelligent. Yes, but the computer can learn, but still some people don't consider computers as really, or let's say genuinely intelligent. So in fact, when we look a bit let's say, deeper into this, and when we address this problem a bit more carefully, we see some other concepts that emerge. For example, the concept of out-of-distribution generalization, the concept of generalization and fitting, and obviously the concept of general intelligence, which is extremely important. Remember, in the past, not that far away, Chomsky considered that intelligence is about being capable of applying rules in an highly Cartesian manner. And because of that, Chomsky said that ChatGPT is full of false promises, because according to Chomsky, true intelligence is demonstrated in the ability to think and express improbable but insightful things. The problem, as we all know, is that when you use ChatGPT, these are statistical inference engines. And most people say, if you ask a question to ChatGPT, it will come up with the most probable answer. And the most probable answer is, in fact, the one that is intelligent, but, or let's say the one that is relevant, notwithstanding the issue of intelligence, but at least relevance. While Chomsky says exactly the opposite, is that it is about improbable but insightful things. So if you look at what ChatGPT, for example, is doing, or let's say all LLMs are doing, indeed, indeed you see that these systems are statistical engines, and because of that, some people say that they will never be able to do real invention. They will never be able to do to be creative in a genuine way, because they give us the most probable answer and not new emergent things. In fact, this is not true. If we look at ChatGPT and other LLMs, we know that there are some emergent capabilities in these systems, and we know that probably the real creativity and the real intelligence of these systems come from these emergent capabilities because of the extremely large number of parameters and because of some specific mathematical let's say, characteristics that are at the heart of these LLMs. So, yeah, I think I could, or I don't know, maybe I could stop here, but just a few more words, because I want to finish with some provocating question. In the past, and if you look at this punch card, you see an architectural plan here in 2D, which is represented as a microfilm, and you see the punch card which is adding some metadata on top of it. Obviously, in the early days of let's say, of the use of computers in the discipline of architecture, nothing changed, because we use the computer just to add metadata to traditional drawings. But now let's imagine what's really happening today. We take a drawing, we take any kind of architectural creation, what we are doing every day, including, for example, using Midjourney, using ChatGPT, using LLMs, using whatever we can imagine as AI tools. We transform this into files, for example, a zip file. There's nothing analog that remain after this process. Every single piece of information is obviously digital. And then the provocative question I want to ask here is, where is the intelligence? Where is the architectural intelligence after this process? Obviously we can unzip the files and we will get a drawing, etc., and we would be perfectly capable of identifying architectural intelligence in the drawing itself, for example, in the drawing of Le Corbusier here. But what seems like almost like a nonsensical question, but according to me, which is a very important one, because it's a kind of question we are asking today regarding ChatGPT, is that where is the intelligent dimension when it comes to computational procedures and computational systems? So asking the question, how intelligent is artificial intelligence? For example, how intelligent is an architecture that would be entirely created by ChatGPT, is, according to me, very similar to asking this basic question, where is the intelligence once I take a drawing from Le Corbusier, for example, and I transform it into a purely digital file? And yeah, I want to end up with this question because, again, I think that what we are doing today, when I work with LLMs, And obviously, there is some smart architectural result coming from ChatGPT or some other LLMs. It seems to me that conceptually speaking, I'm confronted to something which is very similar to this. And I believe that very few people really ask themselves this obvious question in the discipline of architecture. So yeah, I want to stop here.
Philippe, fantastic. Really a lot of ideas out there, really fantastic ideas. I wanted to just say, well, if anyone's got any questions, well, I've got a couple of questions, shall we say, first of all, but if anyone's got any other questions who are listening on the live stream on YouTube, if you could put the questions in the chat and we'll try and pick up on them, or indeed those who are here in the Zoom audience, if you could think of some interesting questions. I've got one particular question. Well, I've got two questions. Let me just maybe kick things off with these questions. In some ways, I think that question, what is intelligence, is kind of like the big issue today. And I say this partly because of this book, Blaise Goriakos's "What Is Intelligence," that has came out. When was it now? Last month, and really raises a lot of interesting kind of questions. Now, what I did on the basis of that book, this is my own personal research, or rather, I did it on the basis of something that Blaise had said on the Doctoral Consortium about 2 years ago, where he was talking about intelligence in terms of prediction. Now, the comment he made is that, interestingly, that's precisely what they were saying in neuroscience from kind of Carl Friston onwards. Anyway, I then looked at this question, and it is, in some ways, I'm a bit unnerved by their responses. I really can't get my head round what they're saying, but they are all saying this. In terms, I mean, Friston wasn't the first, but he's one who kind of, I think, takes up the question of inference, which you refer to, and talks about how prediction is intelligence, which is, it's absolutely crystal clear there what he's saying. And then you get people like Anil Seth who kind of see prediction as being based, so perception is based on prediction, but also to some extent intelligence being based on prediction. That's a kind of that's his whole discourse. That then, if we look into the world of spatial intelligence, and Geoffrey Hawkins, who, although his background is in computation, he was the designer of Palm Pilot. He basically set up a neuroscience institute right now, and he was on before, and he was talking about how prediction is essential to his notion, his whole theory of intelligence. He has a couple of books out on a kind of theory of intelligence. And then you find that others who aren't working on neuroscience, like let's say Fei Li, working on spatial intelligence, but she again goes on about it being about prediction. And then eventually you get Blaise's book, which is a kind of astonishing book in a way. It has a book inside the book. There's a book is What is Life inside the book about what is intelligence. And I won't go into the what is life bit, but in his thing about intelligence, he actually also says the same thing. And what makes him interesting is that he actually has a background in working for Google on the straightforward auto-predict mechanism that they developed for phones. And they just thought it was kind of dumb. But as it got more and more sophisticated, and as these LLMs started predicting in astonishing ways and using theory of mind, he also came to the conclusion that intelligence is all about prediction. And let me just quote from him, because his version is a bit more sophisticated, because I think just intelligence as prediction I doesn't quite cut it for me. I'm not quite convinced about that. But this is what he says: intelligence is the ability to model, predict, and influence one's future, evolving in relation to other intelligences to create a larger symbiotic intelligence. So, I wouldn't have thought intelligence was this at all. This is not what I would have thought, but these are figures that I I respect enormously. I mean, Carl Friston is one of the most cited neuroscientists of all time, and they're all kind of pointing to prediction. Does that enter into your understanding of intelligence in any way? And I have to say, it wouldn't have entered into mine unless I'd read all this stuff. You're muted, Philippe.
Yeah, sorry. It's definitely part of it, and in fact, in the definition of artificial intelligence, this definition of intelligence as being able to predict and also maybe to predict the consequence at the first level, but also at further levels, like the consequence of the consequence and the consequence of the consequence of the consequence, etc., etc. It has been part of numerous definition of intelligence, or let's say numerous definition of artificial intelligence. The only thing is that the capability of predicting is also a very, let's say, sometimes it's a very straightforward mathematical property. So if you, it's for example what is referred to in math as a kind of extrapolation problem. Like if you have a certain number of points, and then you find you want to draw a line which goes through each single point. And then if you look for the coordinate of a point that is not in your original data set, if it's a point that should be interpolated, in many ways, it's gonna be, the result will be quite good. And some people say that what machine learning is doing is just like interpolation. Actually, so in high dimension, it's not that difficult, let's say. But some people like Yann LeCun says that in fact, deep learning models are not doing interpolation, but they are always doing extrapolation, and this is why it's not so obvious. In both cases, either it is interpolation or extrapolation, we could say that it's about prediction. You try to predict the coordinate of a point in space, while this point was not in the original data set. So conceptually speaking, what artificial intelligence is about at the moment, at least deep learning models, is this. It's about, like, you have points. Okay, it could be billions or billions of billions of billions of billions of points in an hyperspace, right? And you try to find a line, which in fact, obviously it's not a line, it's hyperplanes, that will separate this point in specific domains. Or let's say, again, conceptually speaking, it's like trying to find a line that will pass through each single point. And then when you ask a question to an AI, like for example on ChatGPT, what you are doing is that you are asking for something which conceptually is like, okay, what is the coordinate of this new point, which is not in your original training set? This is really what's happening conceptually speaking. So it's about prediction, of course, but I think saying that intelligence is about prediction, it's a bit dangerous, because it gives a feeling that it's a bit of a circular definition. Because obviously, then when you ask what is prediction, you say that it's about the possibility of telling, for example, where is a certain point in space based on a few information, while this point is not in the original data set. And basically, you will say that it's about applying intelligence in order to get the coordinate of the point. So if you say intelligence is about prediction, then you ask the question, what is prediction? And the answer will be, it's about the capability of predicting something by making use of intelligence. You know, so it's very difficult because we cannot, let's imagine that someone would come with the answer, what is prediction? And an answer will be, it's about predicting the result by pure chance. Nobody will say it's intelligent because it's just like a purely random process. And if somebody says it's not by pure chance, but it's by making use of advanced probabilities, it's not going to be a satisfying answer, neither for most people. Because for most people, they will say it's a statistical inference. And I don't care if it's using really advanced statistical inference methods. For me, it's still statistical, while intelligence, on the contrary, and this is what Chomsky said, is about coming up with an answer which is not the most obvious and the most probable answer in terms of statistics, in terms of probability. So I disagree with Chomsky, for example, when he says that ChatGPT is bad and it's full of false promises. I think he's completely wrong. But I agree with him on the conceptual, let's say, difficulty, on the conceptual blind spot, which concerns the issue of predictability, of prediction. Because I think that adding prediction into the loop does not solve the question, does not solve the problem.
Yeah. No, yes, sorry. I mean, I think that it's certainly not so straightforward, and I feel uncomfortable with these. I feel more comfortable maybe with Blaise's description that gets a bit more complex. But the simple notion that it's all about prediction, I think I need to think this through, and that's what I read, but I'm not quite sure if I'm convinced myself. No, I have another question. This is a completely different question, and it really relates to London as a city, and I think what demarcates London right now is partly the fact that obviously the Bartlett gets this incredible rating on the QS and so on, and the AA is not part of that. But over the years, certainly when I was teaching there, it was regarded as the top school of architecture in the world, and it's had its moments. I was there for the Akermenges and Neri Oxman moment when they were both students and things, but back before that there was the kind of Remcool Al Zaha moment, and so on and so on and so on. But London has been, a centre of, has had these pillars of architectural education, but it's also had these pillars of practice. And what kind of unites the two in some senses is that the AA established the DRL, Design Research Laboratory, whenever it was, just before 2000, I think, and then MTech and God knows what else. Meanwhile, in Foster and Partners, they had the specialist modeling group. I'm not quite sure whether they play the same role now. Now it's the kind of R&D side of things, I think, it does that. And then, of course, in Zaha Hadid Architects, there's been Zaha Code. Now, and this is kind of interesting that and often there's a direct relationship between the two. Many of the DRL graduates went to go and work for Zaha, and of course you have Marta Sigari and others teaching on your master's program. Now, I guess I want to ask this sort of general question. about education versus practice, because I think in the context of AI, there are real challenges in education. I think in practice they are forced to adapt to this new world. It's there's no choice. And although they adapt in different ways, I think that Foster and partners are focusing more on using AI to speed up the process. It's less about ideation or generating images. They think they can design anyway. They don't need that. Whereas I think other practices do use the kind of the generative AI for image making and so on and so on. But in education, you often get these dinosaurs, these dinosaurs who kind of say, no, 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 forget that. And at Cambridge, certainly when I was a student there, we were forbidden from using the computer in the studio. It was really quite conservative, which of course, for those who didn't use the computer, that meant that by the time they graduated, they were unemployable. But we've got this kind of tension between the world of practice and the world of education. At the same time, just on top of that, there is another thing that I think is emerging, which is to say that in some senses, in the world of AI, it's different maybe from the world of architecture, but in the world of AI, it is practices like DeepMind or indeed Google that are really producing the research right now more so than academia. So, I think in terms of the two Nobel laureates from London, Geoffrey Hinton and Demis Hassabis, Geoffrey Hinton was an old school academic at the University of Toronto, whereas Demis Hassabis, of course, has a PhD, but he's in charge, he's the CEO of an AI company. And I think increasingly, what you're finding in the world of AI is that those with PhDs get attracted into the profession, into practice, as opposed to academia, because the salaries are so enormous. They're so enormous, they have no choice almost. It's different in architecture, because I think in architecture, in order to get any research unit going, you have to kind of scrape some sort of revenue off the incoming, which is really based on the a percentage of the fees of construction. It's a very strange thing that even Foster or Zahedi can have these kind of research units going on in there. But I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, do you see a kind of shift towards the profession, I guess, in terms of this, or rather a slight difference in the balance from the old world where it all came from academia? That's where the research was done, and now we find that maybe the biggest driver of change is practice itself. How do you feel about that?
My feeling is that practices are paying attention to AI, but in a very non-radical manner, in a very soft manner, let's say. Because if they would take this issue very seriously, I mean really seriously, I think that an office which is, for example, like with 200 employees, would be reduced to 20 employees after applying AI techniques in a very serious way. So my feeling is that most offices are using artificial intelligence, but they do it in a way which is extremely conservative. The deep revolution in architectural offices regarding the use of artificial intelligence has not come yet. It will, I'm sure it will, but it's yeah, I mean, if you can have a car, if you can have a taxi cab in San Francisco and in China, which a driverless taxi cab in a city, then don't tell me that you're gonna not have an architectural project which is designed 100% by a computer. I mean, I totally refuse to believe that an architectural project is more complex than driving a taxi cab in a city. It's not true. It's not true. If you want to create an architectural project which is pure novelty, for example, what Le Corbusier or Mies or some of these great masters have done, then you address the issue of what is genuine architectural intelligence in a way I mentioned before. Like it's not a probable result, it's not an obvious answer, but it's something which is completely emergent. It's something that nobody could have ever imagined, except Le Corbusier himself. I mean, the only person on earth which was capable of doing the Villa Savoye was Le Corbusier. You know, at some point it was a pure emergence. But 99.9% of the architecture which is built in the world has nothing to do with that. It's the application of rules that were established by Le Corbusier or by some others architect. And establishing these rules is exactly what artificial intelligence is extremely good at. It's not in a logical manner, because they are not old-style logical rules, but these are rules that are expressed in an almost infinite amount of ways, exactly what we are doing in natural languages, you know. But the rules, or mathematically speaking, has been captured. The application of the rules has been captured by the weight in the neural networks. So, and by the way, this is why connectionist models are good at doing math. You know, they are even good at doing logics. It's a bit strange, because some old style logic-based or symbolic artificial intelligence are not as good as connectionist artificial intelligence models. So it's a bit counterintuitive, because we could imagine that a model which is entirely based on the application of logical rules should perform much better on mathematical problems that are fully based, or let's say fully logic-based mathematical problems, you know. But in fact, connectionist models are not just, they are understanding rules at a much more advanced level. So when there is a logical inference, they understand that. And when there is a process which is much more fuzzy, you know, they also understand it. And they can also capture this through the tiny variation of the billions of weights, by the way. So what I want to say is that what Le Corbusier has done is, in fact, nothing else than establishing rules in a way which is not strictly logical, in a way which is complex, in a complex way. It's full of tiny modification, it's full of tiny exceptions, it's full of tiny interpretation, etc., etc. But it can be considered as a big bag of recipes, which is pretty difficult to understand. And this is why we study for 5 years in architecture schools, because the justification for that is that it takes 5 years to understand Le Corbusier or Mies van der Rohe, you know. And this is exactly what happened with international style. You had this architect being trained at Harvard. For 5 years, they studied Le Corbusier, Mies, etc. And after they left school, they built international style skyscraper in New York by applying the methods and the rules that were established by the masters. And most people believe that studying this for 6 months would not be enough. So they had to spend 5 years at Harvard or Columbia or whatever to do this. Now, this can be these rules. Again, I insist, they are not like easy to grasp logical rules. It's a set of extremely complex rules with ambiguity, with cultural references, etc., etc. I mean, full of the ambiguity which was extremely important for Robert Venturi, for example. But learning ambiguity for an LLM is a piece of cake. I mean, it's as easy for an LLM to learn Le Corbusier or to learn myths than to learn Robert Venturi, or Charles James. There's no difference, because in any case, through the hundreds of billions of parameters, they can capture all the subtleties of the complexity of the different rules that we are using in architecture. So it seems to me that based on that, we could have almost 100% of architectural projects being designed 100% by artificial intelligence. No architect at all, just pure AI. And again, I insist, if an AI system can drive a cab, it can also design an architectural project. And if it can solve some complex mathematical problems that are given at the International Olympiads of Mathematics, it can also design most of the architectural projects we are building nowadays. So what I want to say is that AI is used and applied in architecture offices, but it's done in a very conservative way, because if one of these offices would say, okay, now let's do this seriously, the transformation would be so amazingly radical that they probably would have to fire 90% of the employees a few months later.
Just, I mean, maybe because the irony there is that Le Corbusier wasn't trained in the School of Architecture. But anyway, just to quickly go back to the question of practice versus education. I understand your concerns that the practice is not taking on board AI as much as they should, but you have also, I mean, I know certainly in the Bartlett, you've got a huge resistance to AI among people like Ian Borden, the kind of history theory group, a huge resistance. So, I think almost the problems are bigger in education. Would you not think so?
Sorry, Neil, if machines will?
No, so I'm saying that I'm comparing education to practice, and you already said that
Yes.
This is not engaging with AI at a deep level, and I would agree with that on the whole, absolutely. But the problem is in academia, you also have, especially at the Bartlett, you've got, and I'm talking about Ian Borden, the history theory guys, and so on. You have huge resistance to computation going on in the Bartlett.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, let's say, I'm almost okay with that, because architecture can also be seen as a kind of a building can also be seen as the equivalent of some sort of a book, or a religious book, like the gospel, the Bible. You can give new interpretation as long as you want. I mean, philology is a discipline with no end. So for some people, architecture is something that should be interpreted. And if you start with this premise that architecture is something to be interpreted, obviously you can keep developing discourses on architecture for the next 1,000 years. I'm not very much interested in the interpretation of architecture. I'm interested in the production of architecture. and I think the production of architecture can be 100% mechanized.
Mm.
Absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely no discussion about that. For me, there no question mark. It can be 100% mechanized, and it will be 100% mechanized. But most people who are teaching in academia are in fact not so much interested in the production of architecture. They are interested in architecture as something to be interpreted. And
Yeah.
obviously, it's a bit like religious people. You can keep interpreting books forever.
We have a question from Bangladesh, from Vasco. Vasco, would you like me to?
It's a sound around me. Please, can you read,
Okay,
Neil?
let me just try and see if I can read it. When form emerges from algorithmic processes rather than intentional human decisions, does architecture shift from being a designed object to an evolutionary event? That's an interesting question. Let me read it.
Yeah.
Repeat it. When form emerges from algorithmic processes rather than from intentional human decisions, does architecture shift from being a designed object to an evolutionary event?
That's a pretty good and also a tough question. I would say yes, for sure. Almost by definition, architecture shifts from being a design object based on some intention to an evolutionary event. But at the same time, this evolutionary event can also be the result of some previous intentions that came much, much before. You know, at the very beginning, for example, it could have come from the intention of the software engineer who wrote the algorithms, you know. But obviously, if we apply this to LLMs, for example, and then we could say, okay, there's not one software engineer who wrote something extremely specific. The model learned by itself, and the algorithm was more or less programmed by itself, which is what machine learning is about. It's not about writing the algorithm, it's just about putting a couple of mathematical, let's say, laws, parameters together, and then you let the algorithm being programmed and developed by itself, you know, learning the weights, etc., etc. So in that case, obviously, we could say that it's definitely an evolutionary event. But if first I would say, okay, I mean, what's the problem? I mean, it's perfectly fine to have architecture as an evolutionary event, should I say? It's fine, you know. We could say that nature is an evolutionary event, I mean, the most gigantic evolutionary event that has ever existed, and we still find beauty in it. We still love it. Okay, sometimes we don't love it that much, you know, when it's about hurricanes and things like that. But for many things, we enjoy being confronted to evolutionary events. So for that, I would say I'm perfectly fine in seeing architecture as a result of as an evolutionary event. I'm fine with this. But now, if I look at the other element in your question, the intentional dimension. Let's say, in the classical definition of art, intention was at the very heart of it. You know, intention was at the very heart of what art is about. I mean, without intention, there's no art. You know, there's no human creation. But this theory of intentionality is not that obvious neither. If you look at the different at the literature about that, about a relationship between art and intentionality. I think it's extremely rich and it's extremely interesting because some people say that art has nothing to do with intentionality. And we could even say that one of the reason why maybe art is not that much associated with intentionality is that if you discover an art piece like 10,000 years later or 5,000 years, if we look at the art of Egypt, you know, ancient Egypt, or if we look at the art coming from prehistoric man in cave, I mean the kind of paintings we can see in the caves, you know, like the Lascaux paintings, etc., etc. Of course, there are some intentionalities. We could say that there are some intentionalities in this, but I hardly believe that we consider them as art because of the intentionality. I believe we consider them as art because of some other parameters, you know, just because of I don't know, maybe because of the of the forms, because of the virtuosity of the drawing, etc., etc. You know, I think we can enjoy art even when we know absolutely nothing about the intention of the artist, even if we know nothing about, yeah, if intentionality is left aside. But then of course, some people could still say, you don't know the intention, but you know that there was some intention. And it's because there was some intention that we can speak about it as art, you know. But this is not that easy to say. I'm not 100% convinced that intention is at the very center of the definition of art, or also at the very center of the definition of architecture.
I mean, just to comment, I mean, I think that there is some human involvement, which you know, even in a kind of where you're leaving it up to the algorithms to generate possible outcomes, there's still a kind of sense of curatorship, shall we say, of you know, almost to the point where you could almost see it like breeding an outcome, like a greyhound, in some senses, by selecting one outcome and then pushing that further. So,
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, yes.
So let's invite other questions. Roberto, are there any questions in the YouTube channel that can find? Oh, hold on. Oh, yes. There's. Okay. We do have one. It was just a comment, really. Let me just read this. Let me just read it out. This is from. Oh, Isa was your. I would like to thank my teacher Philippe for the amazing presentation. In my first architecture week in 1985, my teacher said this: "In the future, machines will make drawings. Please continue education if you have any curiosity and love." Professor Turku Çelik's book, New Science Connectivity, New Culture Connectivity. It seems like architecture and the entire education system are in need of change in terms of application, experience, and practice. Well, I think you agree with that. I think, Philippe. Well, I don't know if you want to offer any comment. There's also a question from YouTube. Let's go to the question from YouTube. In this case, can we say prediction rather than intention is internal to evolutionary process? In this case, can we say prediction rather than intention is internal to evolutionary process? Good question. You're muted, Philippe.
Apologize. Yeah, I don't know if I understand this question so well. If we consider what happened in nature as an evolutionary process by definition, I don't think there is any intention, and I don't think there is also any prediction into it. So maybe I misunderstand the question. I don't know, but I wouldn't make such a sharp difference between prediction and intention. I would say that prediction is about having the intention to know something that comes in the future. So I wouldn't say that prediction can be completely disconnected from any kind of intention. But I would say that probably in nature, in pure evolutionary processes, there's definitely no intention at all. I mean, there's no intention. This we know it in a sense. It's now a scientific fact that has been demonstrated by Darwin, or demonstrated maybe not with a mathematical theorem, but in a way which is convincing enough so that we can consider this as a property of nature, you know. And I don't think there's prediction as well.
So just one of the questions that you raised was about having to learn, or in order to be qualified to be an architect, you'd have to spend 5 years. Are you now saying that with AI, we don't need these 5 years? Is that the?
Yes, I mean, it probably depends more on what we consider to be architecture. If we consider that architecture is about knowing a couple of hundreds or thousands of buildings almost by heart, being capable of making a distinction between a building that has been built in 1650 and 1700 and 1700 and 1730. If it's about being capable of making a clear distinction between an house by Mies and an house which very much resembles the one of Mies by Philip Johnson, if we consider that architecture is about this, probably we still need 5 years, you know. So I would say architecture necessitates a very, lengthy and serious learning. But now I could say, okay, let's imagine that architecture is not about that. It's not, we don't care about the difference between an house by Mies and Philip Johnson. We don't care about an house by a brutalist house by Le Corbusier and a brutalist house which look like Le Corbusier one, but that has been built in the UK at the very beginning of 1970 by some UK architect, etc. Let's imagine that architecture is not about that, and this is not that important. I think we would be in an equally difficult situation, because then it's just construction or it's engineering. It's not architecture anymore. So we probably need to change what can be learned in 5 years. Maybe we need to consider that rather than having 5 years of learning to start with, we could start with only 2 or 3 years, but then we will keep learning every single day in our life, which is, by the way, also what's happening for most architects. most architects are perfectly aware of the fact that that architecture is a kind of unlimited learning process, infinite learning process. There's always something new we can learn. So it's difficult, you know. Some people there are some people who say, okay, it's a waste of time now to study, or it's almost a waste of time to study for 5 years because in any case, if we have a question, we can ask ChatGPT and we get a pretty good answer. So why bothering yourself studying this at university to start with? I don't know. I think if we stop studying architecture, we might even lose what makes architecture being architecture. So definitely, but still, I'm absolutely convinced that there are many things that we are learning in architecture schools at the moment that are useless, nonsensical, because something can be useless but make sense. You know, like if you study Latin in high school, it's pretty useless. I mean, very few of us are going to speak in Latin in the street. You know, I mean, we are not going to have a discussion in Latin or ancient Greek. So at some point we can see this as useless, but still it makes sense to study Latin and ancient Greek in high school. It's a bit like that in architecture curricula. I mean, it's there are many things that are not very useful, but still it's extremely important, and it's sensible to study, to keep studying those things. Yeah, I would say probably what is less and less important is all the time we spend on the design process. What was considered at the very center of the architectural education, the design project, it seems to me now that it's not that important anymore, or not as important as before. Because we have external brains for the design processes, you know, for the design process. So we should probably keep for ourselves what is extremely difficult to outsource, you know, to ChatGPT. I mean, there are many things we can outsource to ChatGPT and many other software tools making use of AI. But there are things that are extremely difficult to outsource. For example, what is my opinion about a certain piece of architecture? What is my definition? I mean, what's my conceptual definition of architecture? You know, this is okay. We could say that the answer to this question is through design. What is my definition of architecture? It's simple. You just make a design project, and this is your definition of what architecture is about. No, I think a design project does not capture everything of what architecture is about. It's not it might have been the case in the past, but I don't think it's the case anymore, because there are too many dimensions of the society at large, too many things in the society at large that cannot be captured in a piece, in an architectural construction, you know, in a building, in a piece of architecture. okay, I can take an example to make this extremely obvious. We could say that if you write a book, you will probably be able to describe what the society is about in a much more convincing way than make a building. Because a novelist have I mean the tools, the nature of literature, the nature of language, the tools that can be used by a novelist are much more flexible than what the science of space and materials arrangement is about. I mean, architecture, you know. We could definitely say that if you want to tell something about the society at large, better be a novelist rather than an architect, you know. But even if you are the best novelist on earth, even if you are Dostoevsky, you will hardly say anything about what has been going on in mathematics and physics at the time of Dostoevsky, you know, simply because there is a kind of barrier. The tools are extremely heterogeneous, you know. There is a barrier between the language of math and the language of literature. And it seems to me that obviously it happens in architecture as well. There is a barrier between what's happening in the society at large and what can be expressed by architectural means. And I would say that the science of design is about trying to make use of what can be expressed with architectural means, you know. But we probably should pay more attention to many other things that we cannot express with architecture, but that still need to be taken into consideration. And this is why focusing on the design work, on the design project as the main discipline in architecture might be a mistake today. Yeah. I mean, I don't. It's something very difficult to explain, but I think architects should spend a bit more time trying to understand the society at large and maybe being slightly less expert in the design process, because sometimes it's a kind of expertise which is nonsensical. It's an empty virtuosity, which does not make sense. And for me, ultimately, architecture is something that need to make sense.
Yeah, maybe I could just respond to that. But first of all, I may be the only example of this, but I studied Latin. My first job was translating Latin, so I don't think that Latin is so useless. It also encourages you to think in a very sort of logical, rational way. But anyway, there we go. But going back to that question, I mean, I guess the point that I always think that architects have got an overinflated view about what architecture means to the rest of the population, and it's quite remarkable when you read an article in the newspaper or online or something, it's about, and it's kind of about who's the architect or something. Maybe you do know the architect, and you scan the article, and there's no reference to the architect. That is not accidental, because basically the public doesn't care really about the architecture in some senses, and I think the success when it does come to design, let's say the success of IKEA, is less down to the design of IKEA and more to the fact that they managed to make it cheaper than other things through various very clever strategies that maybe we as architects should be thinking about anyway. Designed for manufacture and assembly kind of ideas. But I wanted to go back to the very beginning, where you were talking about your students and about getting about moving apartments and things. And when it comes to that, I really think that form that we privilege, design that we privilege so much, really doesn't count very much for the general public. They are concerned about things like, they've got a family, they've got kids. What is the local school like? Should they be in the catchment area of a particular school? They're looking at, where are the closest shops, stores? Where's the closest subways, the underground station? Those kind of things. These are the real drivers of this decision. And whether or not, when architectural features in a design might be an added extra, but they're not the primary ones. So I do think that maybe, in some senses, on the one hand, that we maybe need to shrink or emphasize less what we can offer, but also maybe expand in order to understand in a more kind of logical fashion what the public wants. I could see there being an app designed by an architect for where should I get my next apartment, which will give you all that information and select the apartment for you.
Yes. Yes, I totally agree with that. I think there's many things outside pure design.
Oh.
At some point, AI is showing how important those things are, because if architects would have spent a bit more time on things that are not uniquely associated to design, maybe they would have proposed some of these LLM models, either for architects or for other people. This kind of obsession on design problems by architects has always been problematic to me.
We've got one more question if you have time for that, Philippe. This is from Sujay. Do you want to ask it yourself? If you're not too noisy where you are. Sujay? Okay, maybe I'll ask it for him. Okay, so Sujay Kamaji, do you imagine the future of architectural design process within education might be reduced to access to a custom proprietary AI models, proprietary AI models that allow students to design in the specific style philosophy promoted by their school? I think that kind of happened already, but
in a sense, I mean, most models are already proprietary AI models, but they allow us to design in any style. I don't think, I mean, the AI models are pretty generic. Sometimes, by the way, they are not proprietary. They are fully open source. Sometimes they are proprietary and, like ChatGPT, for example, which is also not that much of a big issue, I have to say. Yeah, some people could consider it's a big problem. Personally, I don't. But the models allows anyone to do any kind of style. But obviously, the teachers in schools, they care. I mean, they are not going to grade every single work the same according to the kind of style it's about. I mean, if you are a student in a school which is with a teacher who is absolutely against the style of, let's say, Zaha Hadid, better not to propose a design project which is in the style of Zaha Hadid, because you're probably going to fail. So, yeah. But this is why we in any case we have to go beyond this issue of style. I don't think precisely because we can do any style, and most of all because we can copy any style, and genuine architecture is not about doing copies. I mean, this can be done by, again, this can be done by machine and by artificial intelligence, and it goes back to the definition of what is genuine intelligence. If it's about making copies, if it's about making a style transfer, is it real architectural intelligence? It's not so sure, you know? So, like all painters, we make copies as students because we learn, you know? I mean, making a copy is a good way to learn how to do things. This is at the heart of classical education. It has always been at the heart of classical education, in fact. But I believe that the goal of being an architect and the goal of any kind of knowledge is invention. It doesn't matter if you're a painter, if you're a mathematician, if you're an architect, or even a doctor. The ultimate goal is to invent, to try to make things better, you know. In some disciplines, it's difficult to say what is better. If you're a doctor, it's easy. If in the 20th century you can save lives that you couldn't save in the previous centuries, it's very easy to say that medicine made progress, you know. You can say that 20th century medicine is much better than 19th century medicine, which itself is much better than 18th century and 17th century medical science, you know. In some disciplines like architecture, it's obviously not as binary. It's more difficult to say what is good, what is better, etc., etc. But even if it's difficult to say what is better, we should be looking for making things better, for the bettering of society at some point. If we don't do that, we just end up being cynical. I don't believe that any. I wouldn't be happy in being a cynical person. You know, I wouldn't be happy in being that. If I do architecture, if I work in the discipline of architecture, it's because I want to improve a couple of things.
We got one question just come in. Maybe we just answer it quickly. Thanks from Dmitry Seregin in China. Thanks for the. Oh, we've got another one, have we? No. Thank you. Thanks for the amazing lecture. Will AI change architecture, the way it looks and operates? Maybe a quick response to that.
The way it looks, yes. Yes, I think it will change the way architecture looks, for sure. The way architecture operates, it depends on the definition of operates. But yeah, I mean, it's gonna change. It's gonna change everything. It's gonna change everything except maybe one thing. Is that at the very, very end, at least as long as we stick to the classical definition of architecture, which is in any case the most relevant one, according to me, you end up with a building. It's not contradictory to what I said before, that maybe we should not spend that much time on. I mean, we should not focus 100% on design and buildings, you know. But still, you end up with a building, and when you enter this building, you have you experience this building with your body, you know, at some point. So I think it's not this is part of the definition of architecture. It's physical, and it ends up as something that you experience with your body. I'm not saying that a drawing by Peter Eisenman of something that has never been built is not part of the discipline of architecture. Obviously, it's part of it, but still it's a drawing, you know. And the fact that you cannot experience it bodily is a very strong limitation to let's say to its architectural dimension.
My response to that is the kind of questions is kind of straightforward in a way that if you just look at an Uber car, does it look any different to an ordinary car? No, because it is an ordinary car. I don't think that buildings will change so much in their appearance, but it operates in a very different way. You know, then I think that would be my response. But anyway, Philippe, we must wrap it up. It's been a fabulous
yes, no problem.
I think. I mean, let me just offer a comment. I think you've kind of defeated your own argument in some senses, because you were kind of saying that eventually we'll become redundant. AI will do it all. But I think your performance today, I think AI has still got to catch up with that level of performance, but eventually it will do. Eventually, it'll be trained on all your lectures, and we'll have a kind of Philippe Morel kind of AI LLM kind of things. But this was a fabulous, really useful. Really useful insight into all these things. I think the question that it really raises in the end is kind of what is intelligence, and I think there's been no, even despite the recent publications, no clear authoritative answer to that, and I think it's an issue that we need to keep pursuing in architecture. But you've really laid out some fabulous comments based on all your experiences, and this was wonderful, Philippe. A really great contribution.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks
a lot.
Yeah, just to say also, we have 2 more sessions in this series. One's going to be an in-person lecture at Design Miami with Patrick Schumacher and Refik Anadol. Then we have another in-person event with Blazer Guriakos next semester. Can I just thank the team behind this? There's a lot of work that goes on in terms of putting the posters together by Mitra this time, and just live streaming as well. So thank you, Roberta, for that. And thank you for everyone, and thank you for the contribution that everyone's come by asking these questions. But above all, thank you, Philippe. This was really an incredibly rich and interesting session that I need to go and revisit and study in more detail myself. But thank you. Wonderful contribution. Thank you, everyone.
A lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.